Welcome to Toy Business Unboxed, your gateway to the secrets of the toy industry. Here, Jason Shea, a toy entrepreneur and expert in the field.
Every product we develop is really inspired by some of the real life experience that we have with our son.
60% of all toys last year were sold on Amazon, which is incredible.
Be passionate about it because it's a road, it's a journey.
Like when you have an idea that you think is like gonna somewhat like change the world, make things better, I'd say go for it.
We'll guide you through the enchanting world of toy design, marketing, and manufacturing. Now let the unboxing begin.
Hello, welcome to another episode of Toy Business Unboxed. Today, we're thrilled to have Jeff, a game publisher, a designer, and also entrepreneur joining us. And Jeff is also the president of Left Justifies Studio and Prolific Games, where he's responsible for some of the incredible tabletop games that he have developed with his teams. And in today's interview, we'll dive deep to some of Jeff's experience, both on acquiring other companies and how he approached the process, and also his legacy of his gaming company. And so thank you so much for joining us on the interview today, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, so can you kind of share with our audience a little bit on how does the company come, what is the origin story behind your company?
So I've been in the tabletop game business for a long time. I've kind of decided really early on that what I wanted to do was design and publish tabletop games, and was lucky enough to get into that business kind of straight out of college. I spent a long time working for other companies. So I worked at Atlas Games for a long time. I worked at Fantasy Flight Games for a while. I was a freelance designer for a long time. So I had the benefit of having experience with lots of different places, and had always done freelancing and projects on my own. But I kind of decided eventually, like in the years leading up to the pandemic, sort of, that I really wanted to publish games on my own as well. So that was where I started looking at what games was I going to bring out and what was that going to look like.
I see. Okay, that's very interesting background. And one thing in your journey, I think, is also very different because I also talked to quite a bit of entrepreneur in the tabletop games and also toy space. You decide to also acquire another brand as part of your business strategy. Can we kind of talk a little bit about your decision, like what kind of data and what kind of conversation you have with this brand before you acquire them, and what making that decision?
Yeah, so the Prolific Games was founded by Bill Sininger, and then he brought on a partner named John Harris, and they had run this business for maybe 10 or 12 years before I bought it from them.
Okay.
And I knew them. They are local to me here in Minnesota, so we were kind of at many of the same different events. We had friends in common and things like that. And then also in those years when I was working at Atlas Games, which was in St. Paul, Minnesota here. Atlas Games and Prolific Games were both represented at lots of different conventions by a local retail store called Source Comics and Games that traveled around to conventions like Gen Con and represented a number of different publishers there. So like sometimes I would go along to those conventions and would sort of either be the Atlas Games representative there, or would be paid by Source Comics and Games to kind of work in their booth because I was knowledgeable about the projects. Bill and John would be there too. So I knew them from kind of working side by side with them at those conventions, which is a very, very intense experience of talking about games, right? It's being in front of customers, for 8 hours a day is very different from sitting at a desk and answering emails and doing game development and things like that. So I sort of got to know the two of them in that relatively intense convention environment over a number of years when they were running the business. So that's how I learned about their games, met them, and we kind of became friends.
I see. And how do you evaluate to make that final decision on, okay, let's say, it's pretty much like a merging process, which you kind of require.
Sure.
Right.
So I had done some reading about the idea of acquiring either companies or game lines. I just happened to pick up a book that I think was called Buy Then Build, which is essentially a book about purchasing existing companies, kind of almost as a better way to do entrepreneurial activities because you can sort of pick and choose what's already working instead of
True.
starting from a
On
completely virgin
scratch, yeah.
idea that you have no idea whether it's going to work or not. But
Yeah, yeah.
so that sort of gave me a framework. And kind of the reason I had picked that up was because I knew I was starting a publishing company, but I also knew from my history working in that business for, at that point, almost 20 years, that it was very difficult to get independent stores or distributors kind of to take you seriously until you have kind of a critical mass of a catalog. None of those stores have
That's
enough
true.
time to deal with like an inventor who has one toy, a publisher who has one game. Like, right, if they had to talk to one person for every product that they stock,
They have
they
no
could
time.
have 10-minute conversations for 24 hours a day. It's just not going to work.
Yeah.
So I was really
yeah.
trying to figure out how can I grow the Left Justified catalog very, very quickly to the point where I can have a conversation with a store owner, have a conversation with a distributor and say, this is my catalog of games. You should bring these in and take them seriously. So I was kind of already in a place where I was thinking about those issues when it kind of came onto my radar that Bill and John were interested in selling the Prolific business.
I see. Okay.
I didn't acquire the business entity per se. We did an asset sale because I don't want to like acquire any unknown liabilities that they might have. And so I bought all of the IP for the games, bought all of the files for the games, all of the like copyrights to the illustrations and things like that. As you probably know, you can't really copyright a game design per se, but all of the other things about it, you know, the trademarks and the copyrights to the actual physical expressions of that. So the way that we went about valuing that is kind of what I saw when I looked at the buy then build framework, which is essentially to have a look at what is kind of the annual profit that these things generate, and then what multiple of that should we look at when figuring out the benefit of it. And I think that that's probably, I haven't done tons of acquisitions, but I think that that's a relatively straightforward and common way of evaluating the value of the business. So that just meant that I had to sit down with a bunch of years of their sales data, because that's essentially what I'm doing, is buying a future stream of revenue. And look at all the different games in their catalog. Tabletop gaming tends to be a very sort of blockbuster driven business. So you'll release 10 games and one of them will really break out, and all of the other ones will maybe sell out their first print runs, but maybe not, and just sit around forever. So it was a process just of looking at sales over time, trying to guess whether those sales levels were going to continue, and then figuring out what the right multiple of that was. And one of the things that I did is that would not necessarily be common, is my understanding in many business things, is a lot of the value was in the inventory. Like if you were buying, I don't know, a bakery or something, you're not at all interested in buying their inventory of flour or whatever. But the fact that you've got to print games many thousands at a time means that it's not like I want to just buy the IP and then reprint everything again from scratch. That would be a huge capital expenditure. So basically we looked at what did I think the ongoing sales were going to be, which I had a pretty good idea of their existing inventory, how much of that was going to sell in the next, we came around at 2.7 years is what our multiple was going to be. How much of that existing inventory was going to sell in the next 2.7 years. And so for that inventory, I essentially paid what they had paid for it. Like what was the manufacturing cost going to be? And for any inventory they had over that 2.7 year horizon, I paid them 10% of that, because the idea is that they're probably someday I'm going to have to put that in a dumpster. It's hardly worth anything, but it's possible that I can use that like as premiums, you know, buy this, get that. Or that maybe I would be able to resuscitate sales of those things, but that it was going to probably take a lot of my resources to do that, right? To take a game that has been sold, that the marketplace has kind of said, we don't know. We don't think that game necessarily. But like if I can put marketing into it, then you can sell that inventory. It's not like literally without value, but that there's not really much to pay them for, since there's not an ongoing stream of that. So that's broadly what the process looked like, and what the thinking was in terms of how are we going to figure out what this is worth.
I see. Yeah, thank you for sharing that experience because I think not a lot of people have went through, the type of acquisition and merger that you have
Hmm.
done. And just like you say, this is just a different approach when you come to entrepreneurship and also business. Was there some of what was some of the biggest challenge that you faced during this process, and how long did that process took you?
One of the challenges with is the fact that it's just for a very, very small acquisition like this one.
Mhm.
My company was very, very small at the time. It's still a small company, but it was
Yeah.
very, very small at the time. Prolific Games was a very small company.
Mhm.
The kind of legal expertise that you need to do something like this is relatively expensive. How does
True.
it make sense to get that
Yeah.
legal work done?
Yeah.
And so we managed to kind of come up with a creative solution to that,
Oh,
that was
okay.
able to lower the prices in a reasonable way, so that it didn't like overcome the entire thing. But it was a struggle to try to figure out
Yeah,
how
for sure.
is that going to work? How are we going to do uh, grown up business on
Mhm.
grade school pricing, if
Pricing
that makes
budget.
sense?
Yeah, with a
But
lower budget. Okay,
you can
makes sense.
work through that, but like
Yeah.
we often find in the tabletop game business among smaller companies that we're put
Mhm.
in that process all the time. Like if you're going to
Yeah.
go to a trade show as
Yeah.
Microsoft, you're going
Mhm.
to be able to easily spend all kinds of money to buy tons of space on the exhibit hall floor, and when you've got to
Sure.
truck all of your equipment in there, you're just going to pay a freight line to do it. um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but at a small company, like the cost of paying drayage at the exhibit hall floor from the loading dock to your booth can be crippling. So it's a lot of creative problem solving.
Sure.
With the acquisition, it was kind of the same creative problem solving that I face otherwise.
I see. Thank you so much for sharing. And I want to transition to the next part of our interview to talk about the existing board game line that you already have.
Hmm.
And I know you have some game that you can also share. What would you say out of your catalog? Which one is the best seller, and what do you think is the reason behind it? And if you can show like the
Yeah,
actual
I
copy
mean,
of it,
so
that'd be great.
the best selling game in the catalog today is for sure Flapjacks and Sasquatches, which is the key
Mhm.
game that came along with the Prolific Games thing. This is essentially the game that
Mhm.
makes that entire Prolific catalog most attractive. And this is a very simple card game about being a lumberjack and cutting down trees. And honestly, before I started to seriously explore the idea of
Mhm.
buying Prolific Games, it was not
Yeah.
necessarily a game that I personally took all that seriously, because
Mhm.
it was not very similar to the kinds of games that Atlas made. It was not very similar to the kinds of games that I was most personally interested in playing.
Okay.
Um, and it was really it kind of transformed part of my take about the entire tabletop gaming business when obviously one of the first things that I did after this became a serious thing to consider was I sat down and played all of those games, and I played them with
Yeah. Of
different
course.
people.
Yeah.
And uh, had a really good time playing them. And so then I had to start to unpack, well, what is it that I liked about these games? And furthermore, one
Mhm.
of the things that had kind of made me take it seriously was Bill and John were like, look, we've been selling this game for 10 or 12 years or however many at the point. These
Yeah.
Amazon ratings that we have accumulated over time are real good. This is a
Mm.
4.7 game over 10 or
Okay.
12 years.
Yeah.
So you have to take that seriously, whatever you think
Mhm.
about that game, right? If somebody came to me and told me that Candyland is a 80-year seller on Amazon and it's a
Yeah.
5.7, and here's an opportunity to acquire that, whatever I think of Candyland, someone likes it for some reason, and I got to
Mhm.
figure out why. And that
Mhm.
really sort of opened my mind to the way people have fun with their friends and families
Mhm.
playing games, and how that is kind of one of the very most important things about those games is the way that people have fun with it,
Yeah.
rather than what is the, I don't know, like college level artistic merit of a game from a game design process, right? There's
Sure.
obviously a big difference between a movie that wins an Oscar and a movie that comes out on Netflix that they want everybody to watch that weekend.
Mhm.
And so that was very, very useful for me. And I kind of use that understanding all the time in the
Mhm.
business now. And it really informs my thinking about it,
I
if that
see.
makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And since you mentioned about Amazon, I also want to transition to talking about Amazon a little bit because that they are kind of the biggest elephant in the room
Mhm.
when you talk about especially online sales because they pretty much dominate the U.S. marketplace when it comes to
Yeah.
e-commerce. So I of course we also have been working with your team with what we do here at Toy Launch. Can you also kind of share with our audience like what was going on in your business that caused you to consider like working with like a team like ours to help you with digital marketing effort on Amazon?
Yeah, well, so I had worked with another kind of Amazon partner in a previous year, and that process had not necessarily been very smooth.
Mm.
And so I had kind of decided that it was going to be necessary for me to just try to learn all of that stuff myself,
Okay.
so I could essentially do it on my own. But as a very tiny business, that proved extremely difficult, right? There are so many things as an
Yeah.
entrepreneur that you've got to be doing all the time,
Mhm.
unless you've got a gigantic pit of money out in your backyard. Um, you've just got to try to you've got to try to figure out what to do if you can't just hire as many people as you need. So
Yeah.
I knew that there was something there, because of the historical sales that we see on Amazon. We did see really big holiday sales that year. I had worked with this other company, so I knew
Mhm.
that there was very high potential there. I kind of
Mhm.
spent a few months digging into it myself and further kind of satisfying myself of the idea that
Mhm.
there was something there that could be done, but that I just didn't necessarily have time to do it all myself.
Yeah.
And so it was a good time to meet up with you and to kind of um, try to figure out if I could hand over a bunch of those pieces to somebody else, bring in
Mhm.
somebody else's expertise, but do it from a better position of knowledge myself,
Mhm.
um, so that I could have more understanding of how and why it was working, and also use that as an opportunity to educate myself further. That was one of the things that I thought was really valuable about our early conversations is your willingness to say, look, all of this work that we're going to do is going to be completely open to you. You're going to be
Mhm.
able to use this as a learning springboard for the future. We're not trying to attach ourselves like a parasite to your next 20 years of earnings on Amazon.
Of course.
And
Yeah.
so that is
Yeah.
something that I felt real good about.
I see. Thank you so much for sharing that. And how was the business doing like before you work with our team, and what were some of the results that you're seeing after we implement a lot of the changes? Of course, we're still in the middle of launching a lot of the new
Sure.
product for you
we're
right
we're
now.
seeing we're seeing a pretty good return on the advertising that we're doing. Honestly, one of the things that had made our Amazon business very, very up and down in the past is
Yeah.
that we would go out of stock of our
Mm,
key games sometimes
mm,
for months and months at a time, and that was not
yeah.
necessarily as much about anything else as just our predicting what our needs were going to be, but then also predicting what the supply chain was going to look like around
Mm,
those
okay.
times. And then also predicting what it was going to take us to be able to. So, like, one of the things that I did when I first brought Flapjacks and Sasquatches on from Prolific was
Yeah.
that I rewrote all of the rules and did a whole bunch of work on the packaging and
Oh,
changed up
whoa.
some
Okay.
of the cards.
Yeah.
So, I knew that I wanted to do that. And I
Mhm.
knew that their inventory was about to run out, but I could just only revise that stuff so fast. And that led to a
Mhm.
inappropriately long stock outage that was very frustrating. But like, there was just
Mm,
nothing for it. I didn't want to send back a game that I knew was not um, easily improved. And so I guess
mhm.
that's relatively further back in the past. We actually wound up
Yeah.
with this last reprint. It arrived at my warehouse on the same day that I sold the very last copy to one of
Mhm.
my web store mail order customers. So
Oh,
we
okay.
timed it accidentally just exactly right. Ideally, we would have
Yeah.
had more copies sitting in FBA at that time, but it was
Yeah.
very close this time around. So that
I
inventory management is going to continue to be something that I need to work hard on.
For sure, and that's something obviously our team will also partner with you alongside. And how has that impact your business since with all the new implementation that we have done on your Amazon account? Like you noticed on your end as far as revenue and also streamline some of your operation.
Yeah, it's been nice to have kind of somebody else driving that forward. One of the things that I'm sure, as you know, I have been not particularly good at is reviewing all of the new creative as fast as it comes in, because you can
Yeah.
obviously only push it out as fast as I can say, yes, this is correct, or like
Yeah,
I'm the person who knows the most about the brand. So to be able
of
to
course.
review some page copy and say, well, this is not quite true about this game. We need to put it in
Yeah.
another way so that customers are not confused. But that back and
Okay.
forth has been extremely productive,
Mhm.
because I feel like you have the expertise of how is this game best positioned for an Amazon marketplace, whereas I spend a lot of my time talking about these games either to experienced tabletop gamers, so I talk about it for them in a very specific way, or to store owners, so I talk about it
Mhm.
to them in a very specific way. And both of those ways are very different than the way that you would optimize it for an Amazon search, or talk
Mhm.
about it to someone um, who is not necessarily an extremely experienced game player, right? We can't use technical terms very
Yeah.
much, or even middling technical terms like what's a push your luck game. An average person off the street does not necessarily understand that term, even though they've played games like that and enjoy them.
For sure, for sure, for sure. And also with your catalog, there's a lot of different like variations and a lot of different product
Yes.
we're also working on. And of course, getting that information correct and also highlighted in a way that people can understand it like really quickly. I think it's going to
Hmm.
be, I mean, very, especially for Amazon, because people have very short attention span on Amazon when they
Right.
are shopping and looking through the images and looking through the copy. I think that's one thing that we really enjoyed working with you and your team on making sure we can get that kind of information correct and that point across to the potential customer as well. So that being said, any other project that you're working on into 2025 and beyond?
Man, we've got a list of, I think, maybe 8 or 10 or maybe even 12 different games that are sort
Okay.
of in our development pipeline. The
Okay.
way kind of the tabletop game business works is a little bit like the way the like novel publishing business works. I don't know if this is the way it's done in kind of toy making or not, but
Mhm.
most of the games that I publish are designed by someone else who comes up with
Mhm.
the idea and tests it out and then goes around to different publishers trying to sell it the same
Mhm.
way that a novelist might write a novel and then
Mhm.
bring it around to different publishers to try to get that done. So I've got a lot of different designs that I have um, contracted with designers to publish, where we're
Mhm.
still just working on them, making changes,
Making
developing them.
changes. Okay.
We have new expansions for Flapjacks and Sasquatches that we want to do. We have a
Mhm.
new expansion for the Flapjacks and Sasquatches dice game that we want to do. That's another thing that we did
Mhm.
last year. We released a dice game
Oh,
to
yeah.
extend the Flapjacks and Sasquatches brand. And we did a bunch of other lumberjack games as well. So we kind of have more of those things that we want to do that are just in various states of development. The
Mhm.
thing that is going on right now, honestly, is that a bunch of my consulting clients have completely blown up. And so my entire first
Oh,
quarter is going to be a lot of my time working on other people's companies and
I
trying
see.
to juggle all and spin all the plates on my own. So
I
there's
see.
tons of projects that I want to do looking forward into
Mhm.
2025.
Mhm.
And they are not necessarily all as fully baked as I would want them to be, because
I
my
see.
time's divided. As I'm
Okay.
sure tons of other people know who also have small businesses that are either still working on consulting or have 2 or 3 businesses they're running at the same time, or
Yeah.
they're trying to spin those up kind of on their nights and weekends while they have another full-time job. I think that that's pretty common um,
I can relate to that running a
entrepreneurial
few.
situation.
I can totally relate to that because that's my position running
Yeah,
a few businesses and
yeah.
try to juggle everything and make sure everything can stay in the air
And the
as
kinds
well.
of people who want to do entrepreneurial businesses, like most of them do not only have one idea. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. We tend to be the visionaries and try to come up with different ideas and really try to also get that push over the finish line as well. So and Since you mentioned about your consulting, you might also sharing a little bit about what do you do for other people for consulting as well.
Yeah, sure. Kind of because I've been in this tabletop game business for so long, I've seen lots of different ways of doing business, and I've done lots of kind of different tasks. I started out in game design. I've done tons of writing, rule book writing, marketing writing, things like that. I've
Mhm.
been sort of a project manager. I've been an
Mhm.
executive at different publishing companies. So a lot of what I do now is sort of consulting on creative process in
Oh,
tabletop
okay.
games.
I see.
So, like, how do you make sure that if you've got a Kickstarter that kickstarted 6 different games and 20 stretch goals, how are you going to make sure that that comes out on time? How are
Mm,
you going to
yeah.
use the assets at your company and make sure that when the game designers get done with it, that that information is passed to the graphic designers in an orderly fashion and
Mm,
at the level of quality where you don't have to redo it 3 more times because the
mhm.
graphic designers didn't understand all of the information that they needed to understand. So because I've been
Mhm.
involved in those creative operations, like all the way from the
Mm,
blue sky brainstorming at the front of a project to
yeah.
receiving it from the printer after you work with them, I'm in a
Mm,
real good position to kind of offer advice at all of those different stages. So that's a lot of the work that I do with different companies. I also my original training was I have an English major, and then I've got a graduate degree in screenwriting. So I've
oh,
done
whoa. Okay. I didn't know that. Okay.
lots of writing, and
I
so
see.
I'm in a very good position as someone who understands game mechanics, but also the technical details of writing, of just sitting down and writing rule books for people so that they're very easy to understand, and people can kind of get to the fun right away. So that's a more discrete chunk of task that I can like parachute in and do for one company and then come back out again.
I see. Yeah, that's definitely a very unique skill set, and I think especially for the board game market, that rule book and the mechanism on how the rule is being played and the interactiveness of the between the players and also the pace, how fast the game is going is all very important to make sure we keep the player engaged and they actually want to come back and play it again. Otherwise, they play once and they
Especially
don't like it and they don't play it over again. So
Yeah, and it's especially true because the ideal circumstance is that no one ever has to pick up that rule book, right? What you
mm,
would really want is for that thing to not even exist. But
mm,
somehow people have to learn it. And the thing that we
yeah,
sometimes say is the designer doesn't come in the box. He can't like pop out and tell you how to play it. And so we're left with the
yeah,
situation where there's got to be a rule book or like a video to support it or something like that.
yeah.
I learned a lot from a guy named Luke Peterschmidt when
Okay.
he was consulting for Spin Master and I was working for him.
Oh,
We
okay.
were working on the Bakugan toy, the little robot spheres that pop open and become robots. And
Mhm.
he would talk to me at great length about how nobody wants to read this rule book. Assume that you have like one sentence to tell them what to do, and they will not listen to any of this. Jeff, you've written tons and tons of beautiful stuff, and we can't have any of it because no one wants to read this garbage. How can we communicate to the people how to play this game without
Yeah.
telling them anything? Or like if you've
Mhm.
got one image, what could you tell them? He really, because that's not something that if you write this stuff, you want to believe that everybody's going to read it in
Read
great
it. Yeah,
detail.
but that's
but
not true.
but
Yeah.
at the end of the day, no one cares about that. You're right, that's not true at all. So
Yeah.
how are you going to communicate this stuff, do the best you can to make something that no one wants to read
Mhm.
enjoyable and effective? Not
Mm.
easy. Not easy.
Yeah, definitely not easy. But that's also a very important component
Mhm.
to it as well. And one thing I know is like very interesting and is like how are you currently doing the playtesting process, because that's also very important when it comes to like board game design and getting feedback and like
Yep.
incorporate some of the how are you currently incorporate that in as part of your process?
Kind of two different ways. One of them, this was the smartest thing that I did when I left Fantasy Flight Games in 2009, was I started up a weekly playtest group and like just found some very reliable people who were willing to meet with me every week and just sit down and playtest the things that I was working on.
Yeah.
And that group actually stayed in place for nearly a decade. and
okay.
kind of eventually came apart during the pandemic when we could not meet in person anymore.
Yeah.
But just the fact of having a regular time when I was going to sit down with people that I knew pretty well and that developed a good rapport with, who were willing to like test out things that were half baked or discuss things that were even just ideas. So having a regular group like that, I think, is really key. Once we were able to play back in person again, I wound up kind of starting a different group with some other local publishers here. So we meet every other week now, but it's with a group of people who are all also publishers, and we play each other's designs. We use that group to evaluate prototype submissions. So part of the answer to that is like having a group of people who have a professional mindset about publishing games, so that they can offer sort of feedback on a higher level and kind of get to key issues, instead of offering a, well, I like this, I didn't like that, take that back and do what you will with it.
I see.
The other thing that I do is there's a series of sort of professional development conventions called Protospiel here in the Midwest.
Oh, yes, I heard of that. Yes.
That are annual events kind of in a series of cities. So there's one in Minnesota, there's another one in Minnesota called the Twin Cities one, but there's one in Madison, there's one in Ann Arbor, Indianapolis, Chicago. And going to those is an opportunity to kind of bring designs and workshop them very aggressively with other designers. There aren't very many people there who are kind of just civilians, and I find those very useful in getting good feedback.
Okay.
Once a game gets really close to being done, I try to play it with lots and lots of different people. One of the kind of weak suits of my own situation is that I'm not able to do a ton of kind of blind feedback with people who are kind of less gamery. Like, I don't have the budget to hire somebody to pluck random people out of a mall and put them at a table with the thing, like the way that you might run a focus group for a toy, or the way that Mattel might pursue that question, right? They drop $30,000 and hire somebody to stand in a mall with a clipboard and bring people to the back room and say, here's our game, do you like it? And like video record them interacting with it or whatever. Kind of the way I'm able to make up for that is essentially just the 30 years of experience selling games to people. I've got a reasonably good idea about what's going to work with people based on just past experience. So I kind of supplement with past experience the feedback that I'm getting from playing a lot of this stuff in person in a professional setting like that.
I see. Thank you for sharing that. And the other thing I noticed, interviewing so many people in the board game or tabletop game industry, that's usually like two routes that people decide to do. Either, like you mentioned earlier, pitching to other publishing company and go through the licensing route. And the second route is self-publishing, just kind of like what you did, either buying other businesses, buying other brand, or launch your own own line of tabletop games. Based on your experiences, what are some of the pros and cons, and what make you make that decision of going the self-publishing route?
Yeah, I mean, so I've done both. I spent a lot of time doing freelance designs, or like being hired to work on someone else's line. So I was in role-playing games for a long time earlier in my career, and there people would have a line of games and they would need to hire someone else to write an expansion for their game. So I did a lot of work like that. And then I did a lot of kind of inventing my own designs and trying to find other publishers. This iteration of my company is sort of the first time I've done it where I've got these designs and I'm going to publish them myself. And honestly, I think it's very valuable to do those different things, because now I really understand these projects from everybody's perspective. And it makes it a lot easier to talk to a game designer and sort of listen to a pitch from a position of understanding what their concerns are, right? A lot of them are concerned that a publisher is going to buy their idea and then make it stupid. And they don't want it, like, it's going to have their name on the front of it, but that's a real concern that they've got. Like, they're just going to make some decision because they've played games that are bad. And so they're concerned that a publisher is going to make their game bad and it's going to have their thing on it. So like, just talking to them and saying, I like this about this game, I like that about this game, I would love to work with you. our contract is going to say that I have the final authority on what the game looks like when it comes out, because that's just a necessity from a legal standpoint. But as we work together, what you're going to come to understand is that we're going to publish a game that we both agree is the best game. And you are free to go talk to the 50 other game designers I have worked with in my career and ask them if that was true about the process when I worked with them. And so that part of having a reputation is the ability to say that, and that can give them a fair amount of confidence. So that's something that has really benefited from me doing all the different parts of this. In terms of like whether it's better or what are the advantages and disadvantages of selling your design to others versus being the publisher, that really comes down to like sort of self-knowledge, or where are you in your career and what do you want to be doing with your life at this time. I was in a meeting earlier today, and the discussion got around to the question of whether you should own a house or rent a house. There's obviously there's lots of pros and cons to that. And but the final answer to that really depends on like what can you live with. At one point in time, my family relocated to Kansas City because I got a job there, and it wasn't necessarily clear how long are we going to live there, or even if we're going to live there for the long term, do we want to rent for a while and then buy a house after we've been in that market for a while. But like we looked at some rental houses, and like they're fine houses, but at the end of the day, I just could not bring myself to the idea that if I want to paint the walls, I got to go ask somebody else and they're going to say no. And then I just got to live with these terrible walls. I'm just not, it turns out that I'm not a person who is easily able to live with other people telling me what to do. And so if you're the kind of person who can make a passionate case for what you want, but at the end of the day, you're fine with someone else being the decider, I think that you'll probably be happier not owning the business, because there's a lot of hassle that comes with owning the business, right? You're the one who's got to file the taxes. You're the one who's got to pay the accountant. You're the one who's got to just care about a bunch of stuff that nobody cares about. And it's hard. The benefit that you get is you get to be in control of it and you get to make the decisions. So like, I think deciding based on whether you're the kind of person who wants that role is the key thing.
For sure. Yeah. Thank you for sharing all the different valuable insights in today's interview. And as well, writing down, if you have to just share one piece of advice with someone that's just getting started inside of, the toy and the board game industry, what would that be?
So I think it would be to just like start doing it right away. I kind of generalized this from some screenwriting advice that I got when I was in the film program at USC. And somebody said the advantage of screenwriting, as opposed to being a director or a cinematographer or any of those other pieces, is that no one can stop you from writing a screenplay. Like literally all you have to do is sit at your desk with your computer and write a screenplay. If you want to be a director, you're out of luck. You got to have actors. Somebody's got to pay them. You've got to have a script already. You've got to have somebody else to run a camera. Like the screenwriting is the only part of making a film that you don't need anyone's permission to do. And by the same token, if you want to be a game designer or a toy inventor, there's parts down the road. Bringing it to market is a different thing. But if you want to be a game designer or a toy inventor, you can literally just like sit at your table and start doing it, and no one can stop you from doing it. And that process is a great way to find out if you like it before you quit your job or spend a ton of money on it or whatever. You can just learn that. And the sort of culture around game design now is even such that like you can build a prototype of your thing. You can actually make it look very nice. You can 3D print components. You can get clip art. You can build it in free software. You can bring it to Protospiel events and play it with other designers. And you can learn a lot about whether you like that or whether you're any good at it before you have spent anything other than your time on it. So that's, and also throughout that entire process, you'll get good at it, or you'll improve your skills at it. It's not like you're even if that design that you did first never gets published, you didn't waste your time because you got better at it. So that's the thing that I tell like game design students or people who are thinking about whether they want to make a career transition. I just tell them, look, start designing games. There's a ton of resources. All of the tools that you need have free versions. Just start doing it.
Yeah. And it's very important to just start taking action instead of sitting on the sideline and just
Yep.
waiting and evaluating and not taking any step further. So thank you
Yes.
so much for sharing that. And for our listeners, thank you again for tuning in to today's episode of Toy Business Unboxed podcast. We hope you have enjoyed the conversation and find it insightful and inspiring. If you like what you have heard, be sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. We really appreciate your support and would love it if you can leave us a review and share the podcast with your friends or colleagues. For more resource tips and the latest update within the toys and game industry, visit our website at toy-launch.com. Join the conversation and connect with us on social media using hashtag #ToyBusinessUnboxed, and we would love to hear your feedback and suggestion for future episode. Until next time, keep innovating, keep creating, keep bringing joy to toys. This is Jason Shea signing off on the Toy Business Unboxed podcast, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you so much, everyone.